So I wanted to come back to the topic of agentic workflows to show you something a little bit different and fundamentally actually a lot simpler. The last time we were talking about how agentic workflows can do things like reflection and essentially working to review each other's work, to orchestrate and then pass over to agents whose job is to do the task and then ultimately finalize it. Super interesting to work that way too, but we've also got the option of doing something much more simple when we have good tools essentially to validate the work outside of the agent environment. So that's an example in this case of upgrading applications. So what I've got here, and I'll show you this over here in a second, this is a super old JBoss application, which I'm trying to update to work on SpringBoot, and I want it to be standalone and sort of free of JBoss. This code was so old that I couldn't run it. I legitimately tried different versions of JBoss and messing around with different versions of Java. I could not make it work. So instead of trying to make the old one work, I'm really just going to try to see if I can upgrade this code to make it work in a more modern framework. So I give it some basic instructions. And again, I leave a lot of this to the agents to figure out, upgrade Java, upgrade Spring Boot. I want you to port it out of JBoss. Like I'm giving it that high level set of instructions, but that's really it. The rest of it, it's going to figure out on its own. And this is a long enough process that I'm just going to show you the outputs because it does take a while to finish. But here, I'm going to see this package upgrader agent really take charge. This is the one agent who's going to drive the entire process with the help of some tools that we provide. So in this case, this is talking to this repo, right, that I've got, over in the other window and enabling it to read files, write files, and then run build scripts and test suites, and then ultimately run the sort of install and run, in a local Tomcat server operation. So by giving those tools to this single agent, I can actually accomplish some pretty interesting things. So the first bit here, I give it the instructions. It's now going to go and start using the tools that I've given it. The first one here is read. So it's going to read the POM XML file, which is where the entire sort of application package is defined. This is super long. I'm going to try to skip past it and hope that the whole thing doesn't crash. It's really, really large. But so once it gets through that, the next thing that it's going to do is it's going to write a new one, right? And so I can show you this POM over here. I've actually got it up in the window, right? So it's going to write a new version of this. It's actually substantially shorter because JBoss adds a whole bunch of cruft. But it writes a new version of this thing, and then it runs the build script that I've provided access to. It sort of tells me what it does. That's what this little bit here. Then it runs the build script to see what errors have been produced, right? So these are all tools that are available to this core package upgrader agent. And then again, it just uses the tools one at a time. It produces a lot of errors, and then it's going to methodically go through and fix these errors one at a time. These are mostly simple things, right? This is Java version mismatches and sort of changes in the way that some of this stuff has worked in the past. It tweaks the POM again a couple of times, and now it's going to go start reading actual code, right? And fixing these files one at a time. So this process, right, ends up in a lot of changes. So you can see over here on the left, this thing changed a whole bunch of files. It changed the Java files. It ended up changing the JSPs, which are actually part of the front end view. It sort of went back and forth on date formats. I mean, all sorts of stuff that changes, in versions of Java. But it did ultimately get to a working application. So you can see here, I've actually run this thing. I've got, as a local Spring Boot inside Tomcat instance running. And if you go over here, this is the application that I expect, right? And I can see here that I've got real data. It actually, as part of this, migrated the database and pulled it over. I can look at all the details here. It went through and, checked all of these different forms to make sure that they loaded. I've got this list of veterinarians in the back end. The point is, this is not itself, a super complicated application, but I literally couldn't run it. And the code was so old that we had to modernize it just to get to a point where we could start to work with it again, right? And this very simple flow enabled us to do that, right? By giving a handful of tools to these sorts of agents, and then giving them a clear task and the ability to check their own work, you can realize some pretty significant impacts. So thanks for watching. Again, super exciting topic, interested in doing more of these in the future.